There's a reason why we have two ears and one mouth, so that we listen more than we speak. They don't know, or they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Man has two lives, and the second one begins when they realize they only have one. But what I learned with coaching female athletes was that the saying goes, women athletes need to feel good to play good. Whereas the male athletes, they play well and they feel good about themselves. It's never too late to take control.
Hello and welcome to Hello Moxie. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Urban Adams. Urban and I met through a mutual friend, Allison DeFord, who was a previous guest on the show and is a dear friend of mine. So Allison, if you're listening, thank you. Thank you for introducing me to Urban, because we have become fast friends. And Urban reached out to me after listening to a few of our episodes and had the moxie to ask if he could be a guest on the show. And I thought, ooh, I like him. I like him already. So I'm so excited to have Urban on the show. Urban, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what's lighting you up right now?
Nicole, thanks very much, and thank you for that introduction. And yeah, I am immensely grateful for Allison introducing us, and for me again, just taking that shot in the dark to reach out to you and connect. I'm a husband, dad of three daughters, and in my spare time, I'm a wealth manager, financial advisor for clients. And what's lighting me up today is that I am now adding published author to my resume.
So cool. Congratulations. I think that is such a huge milestone. I want to hear all about your book. Tell us about your book. What is it? What's the title of it? Where can we find it?
It is called Wealth Your Way.
Ooh.
And the subtitle is Building Wealth and the Life You Want Through High-Touch Planning. And this has been an idea that's been sort of percolating with me for the last 3 or 4 years. Finally put my nose down and decided to start it just about a year ago. And it talks about my process, which is more holistic. It's not just managing investments. It's talking about managing our emotions and how we interact with money, in addition to the other planning concepts that are very important: risk management, tax planning, planning for your estate, all of those components, pulling them together in hopefully relatable stories that readers can take from there, take lessons. And if they're DIY, great. If they think they'd like a high touch relationship with someone like me, then they might consider that as well. And I hope that the book resonates. It's available on Amazon as of now. And if I may, for your listeners, I'm not sure when we're going to publish, but if your listeners email me, I will send them a free copy of the book.
That's amazing. Urban, thank you. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. So that is a wonderful, wonderful offer. And man, I love Wealth Your Way. That's such a great title for the book. And one of the things that really struck me is that you talk about the emotions that we have that are tied to money. So that's really curious to me. I think a lot of times maybe conventional wisdom is doesn't really talk about that part of managing your finances, and maybe some of like the emotional baggage or the narratives that we have from our younger childhood years, perhaps, about money and how that's tied to how we manage our finances. So that's really intriguing to me. What can readers expect? Give us a little teaser about that a little bit more. I'm so curious.
Well, I talk about in the book. I tell one story. It was about a couple of clients who retired, were a little concerned about planning sort of maybe you'd call it a once in a lifetime type trip. It was a week in the UK, a week in Europe on a riverboat cruise. They were a little concerned, being relatively early in retirement, to spend on something like that and do it, and at the same time manage that so it didn't impact their long-term plan. So we work through being both tax efficient with
Mm.
raising the dollars for the trip, delivering on the trip, them coming back and still being in good shape, and not to not to put a different slant on this, but less than a year later, one of the spouses passed away unexpectedly.
Oh, wow.
And I tell a little bit about the fact that this balance is not just planning for the future. The balance is living your life while you can with days in
Mm.
the future that are not promised to you.
Mm.
And I share my feeling about it. And I'm getting a little bit of a chill right now as I say it, is that I would have felt terribly had I discouraged them from
Mm.
taking that trip. And and for the surviving spouse who now is has that memory of that trip that they took,
Mm.
to carry with them. And it's not any consolation that they lost their spouse early, but it's about making sure that we take advantage of the time we have
Mm.
without forgetting that we're planning for potentially a long time. So that's what I try to convey to my clients throughout,
Mm.
is the wealth that they're creating is a vehicle to the time freedom to live the life that they want.
That is so beautiful. I think there's a lot of fear tied to my experience just with, people in my life is that there's fear or tied to like making sure that you have enough money to retire, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's hard to find that balance in terms of like enjoying the present moment and making sure you have money to do the things that light you up and they can give you those wonderful memories like that and saving for the future. I'm
Absolutely.
sure
Yeah.
you have to struggle. I'm sure you deal with that all the time.
It's different for every client too.
Mm.
So it's a matter of, there is no one story that's
Yeah.
uniform. It's everyone, and they're designing their lives the way they want it to be. And the more they tell me, the more they share, which I find through simply asking questions, sitting back and listening.
Mm.
And sometimes it's the things that they don't say in words that help convey how I need to guide them.
Mm. I love how you said it's the things they don't say in words. It's that nonverbal communication that is such a
Yeah,
skill. And I've been thinking a lot about how we communicate as people and emotional intelligence. I speak on digital transformation and navigating people through the change process because that's the most challenging part of any sort of digital transformation project in an organization is getting people on board and excited about change because it's so scary. But I think you raise an interesting point there about like how important it is for us as people to really learn how to pay attention to those nonverbal communication uh, signals, if you will. What have you
yeah.
noticed and what have you learned about how to do that effectively and what you've noticed when you do?
That's that's a really interesting question, because I lean on, and I mentioned this in the book too, is that I lean on Stoic philosophy
Mm.
a great deal.
Mhm.
And I didn't realize, but I'd been introduced to it, maybe not indirectly, better than 20 years ago. And I I think that to some degree I'm a little bit wired for
Mm.
that temperament, if you will, but recognizing it and now actively working on it, and working on it for both my personal communications as well as those with the clients I work with, has really helped me. And there are many that I could quote, but the one I mentioned in the book is that there's a reason why we have two ears and one mouth, so that we
Oh.
listen more than we speak. And I've learned to, especially in client conversations, stop talking and listen. And clients will tell you everything you need to know. And the more comfortable they feel telling you everything they need to know, you're in a better place to help them.
Mm. So true. Because you've built that trust. Oh, that's such a powerful statement. There's a reason why we have two ears and one mouth. I've never heard that before. That's
Yeah.
so very, very cool.
I know I don't want to jump ahead to something else we might mention, but both professionally and some of my volunteer activities that we may talk about later,
Yeah, let's talk about it.
uh,
Yeah.
you won't, they don't know, or they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mm, so true. I mean, I think about the people in my lives, the teachers, the coaches that I've had in my lives. I've only had one life, but in my life, as far as I know, maybe I was a cat in another life. I like to think maybe a horse. I don't know, but anyway, I think about the people in my life that have made the largest impact on me, and I feel like have transformed me as a person to become a better human. And you're so right on the nail, you nail on the head there that every single one of those people, I felt like they cared first. Like I could
Yeah,
feel the care they had for me. I mean, immediately think of my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Larson, and he just cared about me. And I could feel it. Like he would give me special assignments that he knew just I would care about. Like he knew me.
yeah,
And I think it goes back to like the knowing someone comes from the listening. The more you listen, the more you know someone, the more that you can care.
yeah.
So that's beautiful. Mm.
There's your mention of the lives, if you will, reminded me. I won't use all the Stoic quotes that I can think of in this conversation. The other one is, and of course, this philosophy was popular 2,000 years ago. So forgive the gender
Hmm.
specificity on here, but man has two lives, and the second one begins when they realize they only have one.
Ooh. That makes me just want to take massive action, Urban. Massive
I hope
action.
so, and I hope it does for everyone.
Yeah. So true. That's beautiful. Man, you're all, I'm already speechless. Like you're dropping just the wisdom bombs straight out of the gate. This is so great. I'm loving it, Urban. So I would love to shift gears a little bit and let's talk about maybe a woman in history. We're talking about history and Stoic philosophy, but is there a woman in history who's really inspired you? And I'd love for you to tell our listeners a story about her, if you will.
Well, it's interesting because it's going to sound a little redundant
Mm.
because that person in history is not prominent one, but it was a history professor that I had in my very early college years, and I had what you might say a bit of a I didn't go through the typical college experience. I went to college immediately after graduating high school, moved across the country on my own, restarted school in my very early 20s, and went to
Mm.
community college and was just taking the prerequisites, unsure what direction I was going. And
Mm.
I had I'd always had a love of history and the subject, but landed in a class with a history professor lady professor, and I'm, I was struggling. I was trying to find her name in any of the documents I had from school way back when, and I could not. She was from the UK. She
Mm.
lived, I was going to school in Arizona, and really brought the characters that we were studying, and I say characters, the real life people that we were studying during those various classes. And I think the first one was an early history of the UK, or England.
Mhm.
And then I later took a U.S. history class, and I think a third that hey, I was going to take electives because by then I was pursuing a business degree, and if there was an opportunity to take one of her classes, I did during the couple of years I was there, because it's rather than just learning the facts of what happened, bringing those particular historical figures to life and understanding the type of person that they were, through
Mm.
historical records and what was known about them, but rather than just the historical events that they were tied to, but who they were was as people,
Mm.
really connected with me. And even to this day, I read a ton, and by and large, it is historical nonfiction that I read, because and I'll read different periods of time, like the American West is kind of in my, you know, on my radar right now. For instance, the 19th century, for instance.
Mhm.
So that was, and to kind of bring that to not only what I do in my free time and reading, but you may have already caught on that I I use storytelling in my my day to day in my profession, and I'll share those, whether it be anecdotes of with other client situations that I'm dealing with, to help clients understand and know that I've been down this road before, or I've helped others in a similar situation, and that ability to convey that in a way that's relatable.
Mm.
I'm hopeful that helps my clients with understanding that.
That's so cool. I love that you shared that she really helped you to see these historical figures for who they were as people rather than just like the facts of
Yeah,
their lives, like when they died, when they lived, how long they ruled, for example, or,
right,
what public policies they implemented or what battles they fought. But like the fact that she was able to bring to life, you know, what their personalities were like, you
that's
know,
exactly the word I
what
was
was
thinking of.
happening behind the scenes when they were angry, what made them mad, what made them provocative, what made them
Yeah,
maybe challenging as people. Um, and I think that's such a beautiful way to connect people to history, but also to connect people to, uh, just like a greater purpose, if you will. Like I recently learned about a woman in my family history who was born in 1811 in Copenhagen, Denmark. And thankfully, her children and her husband just were so great about documenting her life and sharing personal details about her. That she loved to sing and that she'd wake up at 4 in the morning and feed them breakfast in bed, and that she owned a deli, and that she
wow,
loved her business and she used to cater for like the king of Denmark. And, just details about, disagreements that she had with her husband about how he wanted her to stop doing the deli after a certain amount of time because it took over her life. And she loved the lifestyle and she didn't want to. And it was the details of those experiences that really connected me to her. Like if I had just read,
right.
this is when she lived and she died and she had 7 children, but knowing her personality the way that I was able to learn it, I was able to connect to her, but also find almost a greater sense of identity in myself and purpose.
Yeah,
And I think that the fact that your history teacher was able to bring that forward with these historical figures helped you to really, it builds connection when you know those things with other people. Um,
it
yeah.
does. It does. And it was it was something that you mentioned the family history part.
Hmm.
I've done a little bit of that myself, and I think part of that love of history and historical figures, and there's a branch of my family that fortunately has done a great deal of study in this, and one of those branches on my mom's side goes all the way back to settlers of Canada when it was a French province, one of the early settlers of Montreal. And as it turns out, part of that family moved to the Gulf Coast area and helped settle the Louisiana territory for France.
Oh.
And one of those uh, relatives had children with an indigenous woman. So I learned that, albeit very, very small percentage, we'll
Uh-huh.
say, but my seventh great grandmother was indigenous.
That's so
And
cool.
I've since connected to the the tribe that's federally recognized down in the Gulf Coast. Not, and I'm not, nothing overt, things like that, but just more leaning on them to learn about that part of
Mm.
my heritage. In
Mm.
addition to the other side of the family that was in Montreal, I went and visited the park named after my ninth great grandfather just a
Oh,
little over
so
a year ago.
cool. What did you
Yeah,
notice through that experience?
it was really interesting, guys. I'd only been to Montreal once before, and I didn't know about that heritage at the time. The first time I visited, so the second time I made a point to visit. Stood in the park. It's right in the older, it's near McGill University in Montreal, and just had an opportunity to sit there and reflect. we share the same first name, of all
Ooh,
things.
cool.
And and even that helped feel a connection too. Uh, I've yet to visit the Gulf Coast area. It's on my list, and probably, hopefully, in the next year or so, I'll make some time to get there. And I've already got a half a dozen places to visit, and not to mention those that I might visit with to learn more. So
Mm,
I'm really excited about doing that.
that's lovely. Yeah, I love this kind of like core theme of connection, like connecting to people through their stories and through their
Yeah,
personalities and even their character flaws, right? And knowing what those
yeah,
are, connection and how that brings empathy. The more we know and understand the journeys that people go through, it brings a lot of empathy. And I see that in you, Urban. I see you as like deeply, deeply empathetic. Um, and your history professor clearly was, I think women have a gift for being able to tell stories in
yeah.
a special way. So that's really cool. Thank you for
It did for
sharing.
me.
Yeah. And it stayed with you. That's amazing. Well, I'd love to know. I know you're a father. You have some daughters, several daughters,
Yes,
right? You have two daughters,
three.
three daughters. My
Yes.
gosh. I would love to know, what do you love about being a father to girls specifically?
In a few words, all of it.
Oh.
Um, I think about when my wife and I were expecting our first, and we were visiting a restaurant that we went to regularly. We enough that we knew the staff, and one of the gentlemen that worked there. He was a dad and had a son and a daughter. And I remember him telling me, because he knew we were expecting, and he said, a daughter will have a piece of your heart forever. And I've got it times three. And he wasn't wrong.
Mm,
And I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I love that. Mm. What do you love about your daughters? What special qualities do you see in them that you really admire?
Oh, well, plenty. And I was just sharing, uh, just in the last week or so, how I'd seen a number of different studies. I don't have it at my fingertips to quote, but it talks about how the percentage of time that you spend with your children after they reach age 18.
Mhm.
And I think, and I'm hopeful that I'm sort of the exception to that chart, because it kind of falls off a cliff after 18 for a lot. And it was maybe, oh gosh, one was still at home in high school, two were in college. This might have even been during COVID. And we were in California at the time. I'm leaving to go visit one of the daughters at school. I gave my youngest daughter a hug, left, saw my middle daughter at school. We went out for a meal, gave her a hug, drove to Phoenix, met up with my oldest, who happened to be there visiting family, met up with her for a meal, gave her a hug. And I said, well, hey, these days are fewer and fewer that I'm able to give them each a hug on the same day.
Mm.
And I I told them that any day I can give all three of them a hug on the same day is a good day in my definition. And I could mention that tomorrow. I could mention it 5 years from now. What's my definition of a good day? And that's how they'll answer it. The things that I admire about them, though, are, my oldest played softball in college. She played her freshman year. COVID canceled the second year. Third year, 10 years into the season, she tears her ACL.
Mm.
Season over. And would have been very easy to go ahead and have surgery to have her repaired and simply retire from the sport. Instead, she rehabbed 9 months after that and managed to play her senior year in her final games in
Wow.
softball. And uh, I, I flew out and surprised her for her two final games. Kind of choking up a little bit about it right now, because I remember there's a lot of other things going on family wise at the time, and my mother in law was ill and passed away a few months later, unfortunately. And I flew out, didn't tell her, and I had to be radio silent because we use Snapchat together and things like that.
Yeah.
I had to be really, really, really strategic about it. And I just planted myself in the stands. And it wasn't until uh, she walked by and saw me there. And so for her, I say perseverance would be the one word. Because of fighting through both COVID and then later on the injury, and still graduating in 4 years, and with a statistics degree of all things,
Hmm.
and then being a college athlete the whole time too. So yeah, for her, um, for my middle daughter, I would call it resilience. I know perseverance and resilience might sound a little similar, but for my middle daughter, it was at times during high school was a little bit of a struggle. She graduated. She went to school out of state, as I mentioned a few moments ago, and she's now she's about 6 months away from graduating with her master's in social work.
Mm,
So
lovely.
whatever challenges may have existed before, she clearly fought through those, and immensely proud of her for that. And then my youngest, I'm going to use the word bravery for her.
Mm,
And it was a situation where she was in an abusive relationship, romantic relationship, and we were in different states. And fortunately, she had a very close friend of hers and her mom who helped her remove herself from that situation in the immediate, and we flew her home. Uh, but I think about the fact that 2 or 3 weeks before she left, she was visiting, and I made a mention. I've said numerous times to my daughters, whether one or all of them were present, and I said, home will always be a safe place for you to be. There, you always have a place to stay. I don't care if it's plan A or plan B, but you always have a place to stay. And she mentioned to me that that conversation helped her with making that decision. It wasn't the only reason, of course. She was brave and she did it on her own and she made her own decision.
mhm.
But the fact that we made it very clear that it was a safe space for all three of them at any time, it doesn't matter when. And, that was something that, you know, I, I wouldn't, I'd do it the same way all over again to say that, and hope that none of them ever find themselves in that situation again. And I think we may talk about that a little bit more later too, but it's, that's something that incredibly brave on her part to do that. And I'm so glad that she did.
Wow. Perseverance, resilience, and bravery. Yeah. Having been in abusive relationships myself, I can relate to how difficult it is to leave that situation and how confusing it can be. So, I second the bravery. That's incredible. And the fact that she knew she had a safe place to go. A lot of women don't,
Yeah.
feel like they do. So that's so beautiful that you've been able to be a support to her in that way. And also just shows like she has incredible bravery
Yeah.
because it can be very isolating, confusing,
Yeah.
and your sense of self-worth and identity are just like in the toilet. So
Yeah.
it's hard to like step up in those moments because you just feel very low. So
Yeah.
that takes a
I
lot.
know. And when she called me, when she let me know what was going to happen, she called me on a Friday morning and said,
Mm,
"Hey, this is what's happening. It's going to happen on Monday,"
mm,
so that I could prepare. Swore me to silence, to not tell anyone else. And I recognize that I'm sure it was much more nerve wracking for her during that weekend, but it might have been one of the most stressful weekends for me that I've ever experienced.
mm,
And fortunately, I got the call on that Monday morning, "Hey, everything's good," and bought the plane ticket and flew her home.
mm. So good. Beautiful. Man. Urban. So great. You're such a great dad.
I
Yeah.
I try. That's the only thing we
And
can do.
I just love that story of you surprising your daughter and coming to her last few games. I would just like, in my mind, I want to envision what her face looked like when she saw you in the stand.
Yeah,
Well, she must have been just so delighted and surprised at the same time. That's
yeah,
amazing. Yeah. That's so special. So, how often do you get to see your daughters now? Do they all live fairly close to home?
they do.
Hmm.
Uh, one lives at home, and the other two live close by. We'll call it inside of a half an hour, in our metro area.
Mm,
So Sundays are usually a family dinner when we're all around. Uh,
mm. Love it.
the one that doesn't live here is here practically every day. The other one spends at least one night a week here, so it's good.
Oh, that's amazing. I love those Sunday dinners. My husband's family, his parents, they live locally to us here. And I remember when we first got married, we used to go to their house for Sunday dinner every Sunday. And I loved it. In my 20s, I was like, I can't wait to go to Sunday dinner. Like we would go, and my mother-in-law is an amazing cook. Amazing. And and we love to cook together. And so I'd go there and I'd help her cook, and she'd always have a delicious dessert. And then after, we'd always play games. And that Sunday dinner just provided so much safety, you know,
Yeah,
um, which, you need to feel a sense of safety in order for you to really thrive.
yeah,
And so I really looked forward to that sense of safety. And I remember every time I'd walk in the house, just the welcome that they would give to me and to us. Like they were looking forward to seeing us and they wanted us to be there. And you could
yeah,
feel that. And I'm sure it's the same. Like you're just so excited for them to come home, and, the safety that brings, it just really provides a great foundation, not just as children, but
yeah,
as adults, when they're going off and they're becoming independent and finding their way. But like the coming back to the safe place regularly provides such a nice foundation for them to continue to explore and discover who they are and what they want to give to the world. So,
yeah.
what have you noticed about your Sunday dinners?
Well, they're a way for me to qualify it as a good day.
Because you get to give 3 hugs.
Yes, I do. Yes,
Yeah.
and one of my daughters, the youngest one, usually takes the lead on uh, what the uh, what the menu is going to be or what we're going to have, and
Hmm.
more most recently, and my wife is a great cook too, but she likes to let our youngest daughter kind of lead the charge in that case. If
Yeah.
it involves the grill, I'll usually do it, but the just so I can participate. But for
Yeah.
the most part, she's most recently, some of my heritage goes back to Eastern Europe and Poland,
Same.
and she's made homemade pierogies a handful of
Cool.
times. Yeah, so it's and it just the menu is it's nice, and we plan around it for a variety of different things, but it's just a matter of, even if it's just a few hours, getting us together
Hmm.
and doing that. I mean, I remember that growing up, and but mine didn't extend into adulthood. It was childhood, maybe my teens, and by then it kind of faded away with my, the larger family. And I moved away as a young adult from the East Coast anyway. But it it's nice to know that there's at least, when we're all around, that
Hmm.
that one night a week we can have a dinner together. So
And isn't it the simple things? It's the
yeah,
simple things. It's having a
it
meal
is.
together that really, like I find sometimes as a parent, I do feel this pressure with my own. I have 2 daughters, and I feel this pressure of like, oh, I want to make sure they feel loved and special. But the more time goes on, I realize it's just showing up in the simple ways, like sharing a meal
Yeah,
together.
it is. It really is.
Hmm.
It's we connect a lot through music too.
Mm.
I love live music. I love going to concerts, and uh, they've they've grown up in that
That's
environment.
cool.
So there's a lot of times where it might not just be, it might be all five of us going to the same event.
Fun.
So,
I got to know, who's your favorite artist?
ooh, that's really difficult because this was an adventure I went on during COVID, and I went and cataloged all of the live artists I've seen in concert.
Uh-huh.
From I saw Harry Chapin with my parents, and when I was like 4 years old,
Wow.
um, all the way to the most recent we went to is something called Innings Festival here in Arizona that they do right around spring training, and it's a 2 day music festival. It's probably at least a dozen artists. So really, really difficult to choose a
Hmm.
singular one. I've seen close to 250 unique artists
Wow.
during my lifetime. Uh, I
That's
really, so I'll mention who stood out most recently.
yeah, yeah.
I had never seen the Black Keys before, and this most
Ooh,
recent Innings Festival finally got to see them. I would say that they lived up to the expectation of seeing them.
very
Uh,
cool.
but I seek out seeing new artists, not to not for the sake of, but I think the more music it exposes you to. I've been introduced to artists because they were the opener for the headline act, for instance,
Yeah.
and found myself to be just as much a fan of that opening artist, if you will, since then. So it's all over the board: rock and roll, Americana type, or even little country, all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum. I don't mean it in a good or bad way, but just music. I say if it sounds good, I like it.
Yeah. Hmm. What if you know how has music changed you and your daughters? It sounds like you've done a lot of that together or your family. Like, have you noticed any like
Yeah.
ways that it's changed you
Uh, I, I
or
I think of
transformed
it.
you?
Yeah, I really look at it as a form of self care. I
Mm.
really do. I find the live music performance, and you're surrounded by hundreds, sometimes thousands of people who are all sharing that same, you know, feeling about this is a really, I don't want to go down the path. It's not some religious or spiritual experience or anything like that, but it really is an uplifting one. It's a really positive one. I don't ever find myself leaving a concert not feeling better than I walked in.
So true. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, there's something about sharing that with a community that
Yeah,
makes it come alive and feel even more special. Like,
right.
we just need each other, especially in
Yeah, we
those
do.
transformative moments when we're experiencing art in that way.
Yeah,
It just makes it so much more memorable and lasting and like in the cells, you know?
yes, yeah,
So cool. Well, I know you mentioned that you're a softball coach or you were a softball coach of your daughter's softball team.
yes.
And I think have you played competitive sports too also?
I played baseball
Yeah.
growing up. Didn't go past playing in high school, but
Uh-huh.
I always had a love for the sport, and then played adult softball later in
I
life.
love that. Well, I'm just so curious, like as a coach of girls softball, like what did you see? Like, what did you maybe love seeing in the girls, and what did you see as similarities between the girls and boys in competitive sports? I'm so curious.
Well, I would say from a similarity standpoint, it's the fact that the life lessons that playing the sports will teach you,
Mhm.
and it doesn't matter whether it's baseball, softball, or any others. The the teamwork, the fighting through adversity, the dealing with challenging situations, and dealing with others who are not your family members, right? You're dealing with, and you're having to negotiate those circumstances. I think those lessons are across the board the same. Where I've found it's very different, and I learned this early on in my coaching career in softball, was that there's a and this changed my communication style, by the way, too, is that it's very different coaching female athletes and male athletes. Now,
Hmm.
granted, the vast majority of my experience in male sports has been as a participant as opposed to a coach. But what I learned with coaching female athletes was that, and I'll expand on it, but the saying goes, women athletes need to feel good to play good.
Mhm.
And I'll expand on that a little bit. And I would say that they have to feel good about themselves to play well.
So true.
Whereas
Mm.
The male athletes, they play well and they feel good about themselves.
Interesting. Interesting. It's like they already have the confidence, but the women, they need it first somehow.
Yes. And
Interesting.
they, and that I've been coaching sports, as a volunteer since my oldest was in kindergarten. It was basketball, then one played soccer, but most of it, better part of about 10 or 15 years, was softball.
Hmm.
And it it changed my communication style for the better
Hmm.
over time. I made a point to learn and then to know how to better connect with those student athletes. We were fortunate enough to have some interaction with uh, Team USA's softball team and their coaching staff, and the
Mm.
head coach at the time, who's still a college coach in Florida, who was really instrumental. And I'll remember this anytime I'm on the field coaching. Is he said, if you have their heart, they'll do anything to support the play and do what needs to be done on the field. And going back to the, if they know how much you care, then it's, they care what you know. And I just remember it really kind of flipped the switch for me as far as my approach with coaching, because I coached at the high school level as well as the club softball teams. And I remember for coaching in high school, I had players who wanted to play in college. I had players who just wanted to go from the JV to the varsity team, and I had players who were just fulfilling their physical education obligations.
Mhm.
And none of those answers was wrong. And to coach to each of those groups, I'm breaking it into just three groups here, but to coach based on what their objective is, not what objective I may have
Mm.
invented for what they were trying to accomplish. And tried to take that approach whenever I could to help them, because no matter what, they were going to learn the life lessons along the way, regardless of what their end goal for the sport was.
That's such an empowering way to approach it, to instill confidence in them because you're helping them learn to trust themselves and follow their own pathway. You're not going to kind of like dictate for them the pathway, which in that case, it would they would be disconnected from their own natural intuition of what they want to do. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's almost like you're helping them cultivate a stronger sense of self and a stronger sense of decision making for themselves to be able to coach them to what it is that their goals are. It's
That reminds me actually of a story that, and we may not have talked about this one last time, but I was coaching, as my daughters were growing up. So I'm coaching in a variety of different age groups. And this was recreational softball through, the local city league. And I got selected to coach an all-star team for the summer, which means they basically play for another 6 weeks, 2 months or so, playing in all-star tournaments, and you get to travel a little bit. And I was selecting my roster, and I chose a player that I felt was deserving of it. And we went through the season. We had a great time, and then players go move on, and they go and play wherever else. And I ended up coaching one of those players 5 or 6 years later, as she was in her junior and senior senior year of high school. And the very last day of the club season, she's graduated. She's committed to a school where she's going. It matches her degree, goals. And we're in front of the dugout, the rest of the team and coaches, and she comes up and she is teary eyed and comes up and gives me a hug and tells me that the reason she's there right now is because of me. And she told me how my selecting her for that all-star team back when she was 12, stayed committed to the sport, was now, going to go and play in college, degree she wants, school the where she wanted to go. And as thoughtful as that was, and as gratifying as it was to hear as a coach, I had to remind her too that the only reason she was there was because of the hard work that she put in for herself.
Mhm.
I was just there to help along the way. I was not the reason she was there. And the same goes for all of the other athletes I coached. I was not the reason they got to what they did and what they accomplished.
Mhm.
I was just a small part in it, and hopefully a positive influence in their lives that helped get them there.
Well, just you saying that instills so much confidence in them, you know? Like it kind of goes back to earlier your point, which I think was just so spot on. The difference between men and women is that men, they do it. They're already confident and they do it. And I find that this a lot. I found it in myself, and it's something that I've had to kind of train myself is that you have to do it to get the confidence. You know, you have to just put yourself in the uncomfortable situation and just know it's uncomfortable and do it anyway in
Yeah,
order for you to grow. And I think that's so interesting. The difference is because I don't know what it is, how it's, but I've seen that a lot with women is they feel like they've got to either have accomplished something or have certain level of, you know, I can do this once I get to this point of
yeah,
self-worth or achievement or whatever, and then I'm going to do it. But
right,
it's really like I've experienced like it's truly the opposite. You just got to go for it. And then that's when you realize in those moments when you go for it and you learn and you grow from the going for it that you're like, oh, I just did do
exactly.
that again. You know? So I think that's such a beautiful, wonderful observation. And the fact that, I mean, you just gave a perfect example of how you were able to instill that sense of confidence by, again, turning it back to them and saying, you did it. This was you that did this. You know,
Right.
that's beautiful. My gosh. I could talk to you all day, Urban. Well, if our final question is I would love to know, as a financial advisor, and we talked about this a little at the top of the show, but
Yeah,
specifically for women, I think women are often intimidated by or scared about managing finances. To be honest, they
yeah,
don't really talk about it a lot in, grade school.
right.
Um, and so I'm curious, what would you, from your, based on your experience, what would you advise for women who may be in that position and how can they take steps to confidently plan for their future?
Well, quite a few. The first would be that, and this is going to touch on some of the things we talked about earlier, is that be in control of your finances. And I'll talk about some lessons that I've tried to instill in my daughters too, and some of the steps we took along the way. But it's never too late to take control. I have a client who finalized a divorce just over a year ago, and we're working on her being more dependent and independent and
Mhm.
less dependent on her ex and others.
Mhm.
And I provide that objective person that they can bounce ideas off of, and yet still instill that independence on their part. I'm not in charge. They're in charge, but guess what? Now you have someone you can bounce ideas off of
Mm.
without having to worry about what someone's motives might be.
Yeah, so having a third party who can, be there to kind of like be a sounding board, an ombudsman, if you will,
Yeah,
to help you navigate through. That's great advice.
yeah. And I told my daughters, I said, don't count on inheriting some large sum of money. I said, what I'm doing is I'm instilling in you skills that will make you successful financially, because I don't want you to ever feel like you're dependent on another, whether that's a maid or otherwise, that would force you to stay in a situation that is not good for you. The only
Yeah.
ones you ever need to feel like you're dependent upon are your mother and father.
Mhm.
And if those are the only ones you're ever dependent on, okay, yeah, that's plan B if you need to. But take steps that will make you financially independent, so that we are plan B, which is okay. But at the same time, we got started with opening up accounts at the credit union when they each turned 13, because you could open up a student account or something like that. And they each had their own account. They put their money in it. They had a debit card that they could use and not
Mhm.
use if they ran out of money.
Yep.
And it started from there. And then it was, I remember when our oldest got her very first, part-time job during high school, what did she do? We opened a Roth IRA, and she's now contributing to it for almost 10 years.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh, that's so brilliant. So
and
smart.
and then
Yeah.
the other things on top of, appropriately using credit, when to apply for a credit card. Do
Mhm.
we do a secured credit card to build the credit history? And and then of course they hear me all the time. they've joked with me. I say it in the book. They joke with me. Oh, you can talk to anybody. I go, well, no, not necessarily, or more. The real skill is in listening to everybody.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's all of those lessons, and then on top of that, the things like what I address in the book. But those are the foundational things that a you know earn your own living, earn your own
Hmm.
money, be in control of it,
Yeah.
regardless of your living circumstances, and make sure that you're independent. So whether that's creating the independence through getting education, and then finding the career or job that you want to be in,
Hmm.
do your best to be independent before you branch out, or consider being in a different situation.
Such good advice. So important to, again, going back to the confidence. It's just
Yes,
such a great way for women to build confidence, um, and freedom, frankly,
exactly, exactly.
and not feeling helpless or like
Right.
that you're, yeah, beautiful. Um, Man, this is so good. Well, Arvin, thank you so much for being on the show. I have loved it. It's been so great. You have a lot of moxie. I loved hearing the stories about your daughter's moxie and the lovely history professor that you shared and her moxie and how um, she shared in that passion she had for, people with you.
Yeah.
And it's been such a pleasure. Do you have any like parting words you'd like to give our listeners today?
Well, I actually thought you were going to ask me about my definition of moxie.
Oh, there we go.
And I was
Yes.
sitting there, and I was already prepared, and thinking to myself, when's
I'm
Nicole
so
going to ask
glad
me?
you said so. Yes. Tell me, what is your how do you define moxie?
Well, this will probably sound similar to some of your other guests, but I think of it as confidence,
Uh-huh.
hence our conversation today. But I also think about it as savvy,
Mm.
because you mentioned something a little bit earlier that I think is demonstrating moxie as well, and that is, even if I haven't done it before, even if I'm not sure that I'm going to get it right, I'm going to do it anyway, and that builds that confidence. That So I think of those two words when I think of moxie.
Mm. Confidence and savvy.
Yeah, just the confidence to go for it, and give it a try. And hey, you know, the analogy about, hey, you miss all the shots you don't take, right?
So true. Listeners, I hope you're listening. You miss all the shots you don't take. You miss
Yes,
all the shots you don't take. So take the shot. Take the
yes.
shot. Hit
Like I
the
did sending you this message.
Yes. Like I got to be honest, when I got your message, I was like, "Oh, this is cool." Like, I was so intrigued by it, that you would, cuz it's a very female-driven show, and I'm so glad you did
So
because
am I.
it's it's just a joy to know you, and this has been such a lovely conversation, but I think the start to many more. And for our
Thanks.
listeners to be able to hear from your perspective really has my wheels spinning about just the show and the value of having guests like you on it. So thank you.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so
It was a
much.
pleasure. I really enjoyed speaking, and I look forward to any other opportunities we do to have to speak.
Good. Well, for our listeners out there, go out and live confidently and with savvy. And if you're facing something uncomfortable, in Urban's words, do it anyway and live with Moxie. Thank you. That's a wrap for today's episode of Hello Moxie. I hope you felt that unbreakable thread connecting you to the women of the past, to the trailblazing pioneers of today. Their stories of audacity, resilience, and courage are a powerful reminder of what's possible for you when you choose to live with Moxie.